We have another episode of the Chris Rodmack Show. In this show, we discuss about the latest developments in AI, we discuss what this means for businesses, and we talk with the movers and shakers in this space. And I'm joined by my other co-host, Christine and Max. Hi, Christine and Max.
Hello.
Hey, good to meet again.
So as usual, a lot has happened this week. We have more than 30 companies who have announced funding rounds. We'll discuss some of them. But before we get to that, there has been in the recent weeks a recent article and quite interesting, so from Bain and Company, this consultancy, on this called How Generative AI Moonshots Can Reach Escape Velocity. And for those who are not consultants, and Christine was a consultant, maybe you can explain to us, Christine, why this article is so relevant that we should discuss it this week.
I think it's very interesting to think about. I mean, we see a lot of trends in the AI space right now, a lot of companies coming up. I think there are these big questions, obviously, of corporates and bigger companies of how to leverage AI and how to leverage new startups. And I think it is interesting to look at a little bit the fragmentation in the market. For example, I mean, the article says that 30% of all global 500 companies are investing into generative AI. So it's obviously really interesting, not only from a corporate perspective to understand, okay, what are actually the use cases that people engage into, but I also think from a startup perspective, it's interesting to see where is demand and where are gaps that that particular company could also go into, and that's why we look at it.
Yes, so I was reading through it, and so it's always interesting the perspective that different companies have. So here you were saying that, so on one side, 30%, it can be like a large number or a small more number depending how one sees, because on one side we can think that this wave of generative AI started about 2 years ago. So is that a high number or a low number? Up to debate. But more important than that is that the majority of them, they're focusing on incremental innovations. So the article discusses on what it means now to start with like moonshots and then also shift away from just trying to automate some workflows, trying to basically digitalize some process and sparkle some AI in that, and instead try to do like innovations that are much more beyond of what the companies used to on a day-to-day. So Max, you have always been active in large organizations. Are you seeing this? What are you seeing in the space of the big corporations? They're leaning towards these incremental innovations, or they're really betting on here's generative AI. This is something that will transform everything, so we should try bold initiatives.
Very good question. I think if you were to look back at, I guess traditionally, well, I would say large organizations tend to be a little bit more risk averse. And a lot of the time, some of these moonshots that we're trying to go for, they will have some, I guess, some sort of return profile that may or may not be suitable for the execs in all these large corporate. They are trying, but a lot more on incremental improvements to existing product services as well as operational efficiency. But from moonshots wise, I haven't seen a lot of it, to be honest. And if they're doing it, they're probably going to be incubating it at a I guess relatively small scale, which means they don't actually have, I guess, a huge funding to go behind it yet. Hence, based on what I've seen so far, it's definitely more on the incremental side. I think it comes down to two reasons, right? Number one, I don't think we understand what the potential usage of, I guess, the AI or Gen AI in this case for the, I would say, overall industry of a large corporate. They can only understand their current workflow, therefore they're using those AI tools on the current workflow. So that, I guess, that's one. It's just more of understanding how to I guess, reorganize your organization into an AI first company, right? What would that look like? I guess the second thing, in my opinion, is just risk appetite in general, right? If you look at large corporate, um, if an exec has been around for a long time, great. So they're able to take moonshots. They have the backing of whomever they need to. But if an exec only been there for like 3-4 years, you know, proposing something moonshot but then don't work out could potentially be, I would say, career limiting for them. So I think like the incentive doesn't quite line up for Moonshots in large corporates yet. They always talk about quick wins. This is just the nature of large corporate. I don't really believe if you really want to win-win, it doesn't really matter a quick or not quick win.
And maybe just to add on your points, I think it's an interesting debate we should have, which is what is a moonshot and what is incremental? What does that even mean? And typically when corporates or companies talk about that, it's obviously incremental being additional features, additional enhancement of core business or your business model that you currently make money on. And when we talk about moonshots, those are really the big things that could potentially even disrupt the core business or could lead to a secondary revenue stream. But I think to add to your points, Max, I think also it takes a bit of time to see the value and the return of AI. And of course, people are now using AI to automate, to improve existing processes. And I think what we really do see is just a technology adoption curve that's, kind of very standard, where a lot of different use cases are being tested. Obviously, on an incremental level, perhaps some of them will stick and become even more disruptive. And I think time will tell. I think that's number one. And then I think number two, I agree with you. Like there are increments or incremental shifts because people have different risk appetites. And I think a second one is obviously, I think there's another article from Ben Evans around building infrastructural level. So he talks about an Excel file or an Excel software that can actually enable quite a few different use cases. And I think this is also something that takes time to really come up before we see a major shift in different ways of working. I don't know, Rod, what is your perspective on that, maybe from a more technical or product perspective?
There is always a little bit of a conundrum that on one side we're discussing, so we have to show early wins in order to gain conviction. This is actually the article list multiple things that an organization should do in order to move away from incremental innovation into pretty much transformation. And the first one is exactly that, so that we should use early wins to gain conviction. But what I see that often in large organizations, the challenge is just understanding what's on one side the problem, but then it comes to aligning everyone and aligning all these systems, because we're talking that there is so much legacy infrastructure, there are so many legacy processes and so on. So it is not really like a 0-1 flipping the switch and then, okay, we just, let's say, so drop the solution and somehow like magically, so things will change. So even like for these incremental changes, a lot needs to happen for this to be successful. And this is something that we had in the previous wave of AI. So back in 2014, 2015, where there was a lot of expectation, but it was not really met because in the end, a lot of it failed due to organizations not having the right processes and also that the talent will be ready to adopt this technology. Having this conviction of, okay, we will now do some quick wins. Also, we will try to be bold and implement these technologies is one thing, but then what we see on the ground tends to be very different.
I think just to add to that, right, it's not just the adoption. So when we talk about quick wins, a lot of it comes down to, top line revenue. And sometimes if you were to bring something very bold in certain industry, if you bring it out to customer may not adopt it immediately. From a risk appetite perspective, you're selling to a large corporate, for example. Hence, I think why a lot of innovation have worked very well in the consumer space is because when you sell to consumer, if it's something interesting and new, changes behavior, they just pick it up a lot quicker. But if you're selling a lot of it to enterprise, for example, they will run into the same problem with your solution, right? So, for example, you could come to, I would say a giant bank, which is what I understand. You could have a very jazzy new Gen AI solution, I don't know, to improve overall compliance problem. But if I were to bring it in, it will probably cost the bank about 6 months just to due diligence, another 6 months just to understand what are the potential risks around it, and then they need to set up a whole new processes around it to on like regulatory requirement for understanding what's behind those, understanding what data being shared, etc. To a certain extent, I feel like it's good that enterprise are testing stuff at the moment, because then they will realize what they can build, what they cannot build. And hence, the customer adoption phase on the enterprise side is also not there yet. So when it comes to quick wins, it might be a little bit harder at the moment, but you never know, because people change in a whim nowadays, or they just get disrupted.
Going to Christine's point on this article by Ben Evans, so where his main thesis is that it's been now almost like 2 years since we had this generative AI wave, and yet there has not been really new use cases. There has not been really anything like killer applications, pretty much besides ChatGPT. So what do you see as quick wins? On one side, we have this so that we have to quickly show some results, but on the other side, the counter argument is actually we do not really have yet any type of use cases or applications that we should be adopting. Is there anything how we can sort of find a middle path and then, yes, have these quick wins, but also use something that can be relevant for an organization?
My opinion on that is that it is actually quite hard to sometimes measure quick wins. And the reason I say that is because, 30, 40, 50% of incremental investment have been put and poured into AI and Gen AI. And the question is like, how do you measure the return on it, right? Because a lot of employees are, in fact, using ChatGPT. You get a better flow of emailing. Probably you can be more productive because of that. But it's very hard to measure that incremental productivity on an individual level, right? So the use cases we normally see on a corporate level are therefore more towards the customer support, right? So you would have some kind of chat bot that would talk to your customer, and oftentimes it's not perfect, and still you have to have a human agent to help out. But we had some recent article around a fintech player that got rid of 700 people or something like that because they used ChatGPT now as a agent for customer problems. I think that those are the use cases that are counting, but I do believe that there's a huge gray zone whereby you get better incrementally on your customer interaction as a sales manager, for example, or you get better at knowledge gathering because the analysis is done by ChatGPT or any other player first. And I think that's something that we don't measure, and it's very hard to measure. So unless we see these bigger use cases popping up, I think it's very hard to tell if or how Gen AI is actually adding to a company on a broader level.
And connecting this article of Bain and Company with this one from Ben Evans, plus our funding news of this week, on one side, Ben Evans is recommending, or not recommending, but really he's bringing up the topic of some multi-agents. And then he's saying that maybe it will happen that, so similar to back then when there used to be a elevator operator that was controlling the elevators in buildings, and now that doesn't exist really anymore. Something like that might even happen with professions and so on. And one option behind, or one technology, is this idea of multi-agents. And this is also this other possibility for what can be a bold innovation and initiative that goes beyond just simple streamlining of processes. And for this, we also have multiple companies that are raising rounds. So we'll be mentioning some of them just now. But what are your thoughts on multi-agents? Have you looked into them? Have you seen them in action? Do you think this can be possible? Do you think companies will say, now I will have a multi-agent instead of an employee? What do you see that is going on the organizational side, on the innovation side?
I think for me, the holy grail will be Jarvis, right? Jarvis for all, and then when we compete with each other, we'll just get Jarvis to compete with Jarvis, right? That would probably be what happened if you have multi agent, and when it becomes super open source, everyone will just have an agent, or just like they have a pet, right? So I think the multi-agent use case is definitely interesting. We are seeing some of that, or they try to build some of that, right? They were trying to build an organization of information, I would say information retrieval solution, right? something that allows you to access to the entire organization's knowledge without having you setting up calls with random people just to learn about something in 15 minutes. I think there will be a lot of time saved, according to what Christine said. When it comes to like operational stuff, I do believe there are a lot of opportunity to automate like the retrieval of information, understanding of information, even using it to produce something more relevant. I guess that's one. I think, do we see multi-agent from a large organization perspective? So far, not yet. It feels like organizations are trying to centralize some of those learnings. I think it's just the nature of the beast, right? Because of scaling law of AI, which is the more you train it, the faster it becomes. The better, more efficient it becomes. So far, everyone is just trying to gun towards, I guess, one agent for the entire bank that will show ROI before they would deploy it to go multi-agent per se. So I guess to answer your question, I think there's almost like a barbell effect at the moment, right? Do you believe where one model to rule them all, which which you have Microsoft really become the agent for the world? Or you, on the other hand, you believe that there are going to be multiple smaller models that can be deployed to multiple different devices that will do different tasks for you. So that really is, I guess, how I'm thinking about it at the moment, right? Which is on one side that the barbell effect, a giant model to rule them all, or you have a lot of messy models that could potentially be utilized for multiple things. And there is a possibility that you have 3-4 models for one thing, but because they're targeting different customer, people are still buying.
And you were mentioning this topic of so Jarvis. I do not know if you have seen that in recent weeks there has been a couple hardware devices that came to market. So these Humane and also Rabbit that are pretty much like small gadgets, so almost like smartphones that are supposed to be exactly like smart assistants. And the reviews have not been exactly so ravishing. They're not been exactly super positive. It seems still very early days for them. But do you think that this could be adopted so like in enterprise? Do you think that so just like we get these days a smartphone, a company phone, and a company laptop, we will also get one of these devices to help us in our tasks? Or this is something that is still very early days before it can be adopted?
I want to know your opinion first, Rod.
I would say that these devices, they are still very, very basic. And also it's a question of, do we really need them? So we already have smartphones, and smartphones are exactly that. So in the end, this is, let's say, like a handicapped smartphone, and we can do almost everything that pretty much we can do everything that we can do with these devices within a smartphone. And not only that, but also the smartphone allows for running some of these models now locally. So now starting to happen, whereas all of these devices, because on one side either they are affordable or the team is in the end a startup, so they don't have capacity for everything, they have to call the model on a cloud, meaning when you are asking a request, so saying, what is Atlantic weather today? Or tell me how tall is the Empire State? The model doesn't really know it. The device doesn't really know it. It's not stored in the device, but rather it has to call a remote service somewhere, get the answer, and so on. So the biggest problem is also not only that these devices are still a bit so rough on the edges and a bit clunky, but also that they're not exactly very so smooth in how it is to work with them. So you need to wait up to 30 seconds and so on. So it's still very early days, but I do think that likely what might happen is that this will be integrated in the apps themselves. And also, just as some years ago we had like Cortana from Microsoft or Siri so from Apple, maybe that may happen that in the business applications that we're having, or even in the company intranet, that companies so have this so smart assistant and is really embedded into that rather than we'll be carrying a hardware device. But the counter argument will be that more and more people don't want to have a smartphone. They want to carry a full device. They don't want to be like distracted by all these things that the smartphone has. And they want to have single purpose devices. And these hardware ones are one of them. Which camp are you on? Do you have your own dedicated device for everything, or just a smartphone for everything?
So actually, this reminds me of the quantified self movement, guys, 2010, when we had these Jawbones and Fitbits, and I think that was like the first generation of like step counters, right? And it was a pretty dumb device, to be honest, but it was yet another device. And I think we went through some iterations, and now probably everyone either has a smartwatch of some sort or use their iPhone to track their steps, or maybe they have one of those rings or straps or whatever. And it's fascinating to me because you would actually imagine, okay, well, we already have a smartphone and it's enough, and we can, take pictures, we can talk on to people, we can do our workflows on the smartphone. But then again, there's room for another device. But then we also see other examples that didn't go so well. Like I remember the Google Glasses, right? Like that was one thing that tried to like really work for people. But of course, I mean, one has to say like this is obviously going a little bit into the fashion route. So when we talk about this device around a smart assistant in your pocket, I can see this go both ways, whereby it could become integrated into the smartphone. And I believe Apple is already talking to several providers of bringing AI more towards their devices. Or I think the new iPad is supposed to have some kind of integration, if I remember correctly. Um, but it could also obviously be in a separate device. And I think what really matters on the direction, the design direction, is whether or not this device can provide so much value that it justifies yet another, you know, asset or device to have in your pocket or in your bag.
It is a very interesting comment that you're making on one side, yes, 10, 15 years ago, we had all these single purpose devices such as so step counters and also so movement trackers and so on. Most of that has been now integrated into the smartphone. But also today we have, for example, so here these Aura rings, so for sleep tracking, and they're very popular. I've been even considering getting one. I'm still debating should I get one or not. But I see these trends on one side, integration to the smartphone, but also at the same time having a best of breed device, and people buy it, and in the end, so for example, the Nora is not exactly like super cheap. It's I think like $300+ plus you need to pay for a subscription. So it's a investment and a commitment, and it seems to be having a success. And I wonder here in which route these hardware devices will go. But thinking about so the adoption of this device, and also thinking about, let's say, adoption in the enterprise, do you see that this could happen, that companies could start providing these devices to them, so for productivity purposes, or also that companies themselves, so especially if you think about large organizations, so a bank or pharmaceuticals and so on, they employ hundreds of thousands of employees. These days also doing hardware is more and more a commodity. Could we imagine, let's say, a Bank of America issuing a hardware device for the employees that is a smart assistant and they carry it around to help them with their tasks? Or do we think that is something that will not find adoption in the enterprise?
I think it will come given enough time and the right circumstances. Anything can be adopted, even if it's just hype, right? Even your prime bottle from Jake Paul can sell for 1,500 per bottle at times. So I think from a longevity and durability perspective, if it's bringing enough value to the individuals, I think it can be done. And if you think about it, right, like even today, a lot of all this innovation that started happening within large organizations is because one or two few folks, innovators, if you will, or people with vision, decided to onboard certain types of solutions or just go buy certain hardware. So, for example, one example that was given to me previously was that there was a trading desk wanted to trade something, and they needed to spin up their quant model. And what they realized was, this is back before 2008. What they realized was that it would cost them more money to go and fill in tickets, ask for a new computer to set it up, than them walking down to PC, whatever PC solution, whatever PC shop, and put it all together, bring it in, figure out how to connect it to the server internally, and spin it up. And that was what they did, because it took them forever to ask for anything. And because of that, and then I think that people probably realize, people will start doing that if things become a little bit more clunky internally. So and eventually, then what happened next is, they just started giving everyone's individual computers because that is powerful enough for them to run whatever they need. For example, so I think things like that is going to happen. I think human behavior doesn't really change much. It's just the technology or the hardware, the form in which human behavior manifesting is probably going to change. But I guess I'm a firm believer that humans never really change from a behavior perspective. So hence, will it be possible? Absolutely. When will it come? I don't know.
And this discussion of hardware devices, agents, and innovation, it connects very nicely with our first funding news of the week, which is exactly on the topic of agents. So a company called Bricklayer AI raised 2.5 million in pre-seed funding. So what they are doing is that they have built a security platform that combines multiple AI agents. So they say that it forms like a so-called team of AI specialists, and it's not about replacing here the SecOps, the SysOps in an organization, but it's about enabling them, enhancing them, and to collaborate together with the human peers. So in the end, is about having an efficient cybersecurity team. Something such as security is, of course, so here a key for any large organization. And so here the idea is that so we delegate certain tasks to an AI agent. So what happens is that we define some operational roles where theoretically we will be hiring a human for. So for example, Relay AI claims that we could replace a security analyst or an intel analyst or an incident responder with one of their agents. Then also we define which tasks these agents should be doing. And then this goes on and then just replace it. But security is, of course, so at the core of any organization. Do you think that companies will embrace this, or do you say, no, this is a very delicate area of my business, and as a result, I need really to have people who in the end are accountable for this task, and I cannot give it to someone else?
I've been looking at it recently. I think from a cybersecurity, I guess the open secret is, when you have a lot of securities and vulnerabilities, especially in all the large organizations you can think of, they don't catch everything. That's the truth. Because there are just too many different complex applications within a large organization. It's just impossible to catch everything, number one. Number two, there are just not enough security folks that you can hire. They're expensive. And every time something passes through, you want to go to a security folks. The guy only have like 24 hours, or that girl, and that's only 24 hours. What they can do is basically figure out the biggest vulnerabilities and then deal with it. But then for smaller ones, especially those who will eventually compound over time, I think they are not being picked up a lot. Hence why you're seeing a lot of security breaches, data breaches, left, right, and center. I think introducing an AI problem in that space makes a lot of sense, especially from where I sit, is because they are just simply not being solved today. So there is, I guess, use cases in which by improving the productivity of AppSec folks, you'll be able to bring more, I would say, certainty to the security. The overall, I would say, accountability will not shift all the way to software yet, or even AI. But by improving the productivity, the I would say security personnel could take up more for what they do. I guess it's a little bit like the VC cult for accountants, right?
I want to just maybe take a step back and also just summarize what we just talked about, because I think they're very important points. We had a quick conversation around devices and whether or not AI merits another device to be an assistant. We talked about use cases and productivity, and we talked about probably responsibility. So if things go wrong, who's going to be accountable for it, right? And the way I look at it from a, you mentioned this security or cyber security startup. I think from a productivity point of view, as you pointed out, Max, to me, this is a workflow augmentation, right? Like as the Bain and Company article is also mentioning that 38% is about augmentation, automation. And I think as long as the AI in this particular case is enhancing and helping the productivity of the employee, I think it makes a lot of sense, and it can also be applied in a cybersecurity type of environment. I think at the end of the day, the accountability still needs to be with someone that employs the AI or use the AI to perform the task. But the comparison I would make here is like basically using a software like Excel or another tool like a grammar tool to make sure that you spelled out the text correctly. But it's at the end your fault or you're responsible for your text that you write. That's how I would look at it. And then on the device, like, does it merit another device? And I was thinking about that. I'm like, well, it makes sense to have a device if it somehow provides more security and you like just talk to this particular device and it's like on premise. But if not, it doesn't, in my opinion, deserve another separate device to make sure that you have your smart assistant somewhere, that you can interact with it. I think it's totally fine for a company to have it on the phone, on the company phone, on the company laptop that already has a certain security level. So maybe that's just to tie everything back together. What's your opinion, Rod?
That makes a lot of sense, and I was thinking also connecting this to another company that so raise also in this space of cybersecurity, because we're debating on, can we really delegate cybersecurity tasks to an AI agent? Do we need to have the people accountable? And what is interesting about this other one is that whereas Bricklayer AI seems to be focused more on cybersecurity itself and enabling teams in security operations and so on to complete their tasks, this other one called Apex, who is being backed by Sam Altman from OpenAI, so just raised 7 million. And although they're also a cybersecurity company, their focus is rather different, where they're rather focusing on just making sure that this adoption that is happening in the enterprise of AI is made in a secure fashion. So meaning they're claiming that now 92% of all Fortune 500 organizations, in some fashion, they're using ChatGPT, or at least their employees are using it, maybe like on this side. Organizations do not have this visibility. And so who is doing what, which data is being passed, and so on. So they're trying to establish this layer that just focuses on controlling security of AI adoption using also AI agents. And I think it's coming like a good balance between saying, on one side, agents, yes, makes a lot of sense, but maybe early days. Second, cybersecurity, always an interesting topic, both from startups as well as what is important in the top of mind of the enterprise.
When it comes to, I guess, adoption of all this solution, I think there is definitely going to be more solution that will help us to figure out the security aspect of a AI solution, if you will. So it's almost like you have a software, but then you have another software to check the software if it's safe. So now you have AI, then you have another AI to check this AI if it's safe. I think the parallel there is, I guess, similar to software being adopted within a large organization. The first wave of software per se was to take a lot of manual processes and turn them into code. And then I think from now, what we want to move on is that from one type of, I would say, automation with existing software to using AI to do some of those automation, which makes it a lot quicker, a lot faster, whatever adjective you want to add to it, which also means that opens up ourselves to certain type of security and vulnerability within the organization. So certainly, I could see banks doing that, especially, I would say, not just banks, any sort of regulated industry, especially when you have to answer to certain type of regulators. I think there is a need for this type of solution, and because it's giving you the license to operate in a way, both figuratively and literally, right? Because if you lose the confidence of your customer, you're also not going to be able to operate going forward. So I think cybersecurity, it's definitely one that people will look into using even more solution. And I guess cybersecurity also doesn't stop that, because you're only as good. You're basically playing a cat and mouse game, right? You're never going to win, because they're always, if there's a new technology, someone out there are trying to figure out how to use the new technology to attack you. So then you have to figure out how to use new technology to counter them. So it never actually really stops. You're just gonna keep going, which creating this, constant movement of becoming better and better and better. So that's how I think, it will be adopted, especially in the cybersecurity space.
I think this is not an easy question because there are a lot of checklists, and I think it depends on the strategy, it depends on the security level, it also depends on who are the partners that these companies have already, and can these partners actually provide a level of security, or is it really greenfield? You're going to have to like just look into the market and find a player. I think generally speaking, corporates and larger companies tend to gravitate towards brands they know.
We had a technical glitch that did not allow us to finish recording our episode. We're just starting and learning. For this reason, we'll be thrilled if you share in the comments what is it that you like that we should include, the companies we should discuss, the concepts, ideas, anything. And remember to share this episode with your friends, family, peers, everyone. And to tune in next week for another episode of the Chris Rodmack Show, a show where we discuss the impact that generative AI is having across industries. Join us next week for another conversation, and thank you for being here. Looking forward to see you next week.